average specimen on 582 and in various other places. A man worthy to edit Lucretius should have forborne to apply the term inscitia to such a predecessor as Lambinus. In 1801, Wakefield's text was reprinted at Leipzig by Eichstadt, who had previously obtained repute by his edition of Diodorus Siculus. The first volume, containing the text of the 6 books, Judicius Prolegomena, and an excellent index, is the only one that has appeared. In 1828 came forth the edition of Forbiger, which, chiefly perhaps from the convenience of its size, has been much used. His text is Wakefield's, with but very few alterations, and all his explanations of passages are Wakefield's. His work, says Lachmann, was mercenary, and it would be doing him great injustice to suppose him capable of seeing anything by the light of his own intellect. In 1850, at Berlin, appeared Lachmann's edition in 2 thin volumes octavo. He is a little too fond of transposing verses and discovering deficiencies in the text, but deserves great commendation for restoring many readings that Wakefield had ejected. His notes are not at all explanatory, but are wholly occupied about changes in the text. With regard to versions of Lucretius, the earliest attempt to render him into English was made by John Evelyn, the author of Silva, who, in 1656, published the first book in verse, with a commentary. His lady designed the frontispiece, and Waller prefixed a copy of verses. The translation is faithful, but tame. In 1682 was published the translation by Creech, which, as the first complete version of the poet, was cordially welcomed. Evelyn furnished some laudatory couplets, saying how much he was pleased that the entire work had fallen to more vigorous hands than his own. Duke, Tate, and Otway gave also their tribute of verse, and Creech was everywhere known as the English Lucretius. But posterity have had time to discover the faults in his performance. Many of his lines are vigorous, but many are stiff and awkward, and the licenses which he has taken with the original are almost beyond belief. Whoever will look at the commencement of his first book will find that between the 10th and 16th verses he inserts 5 lines of his own. Similar interpolations may be found in other places, and he likewise curtails with equal freedom whenever it suits his purpose. About the same time Dryden produced some translations, or rather paraphrases, of particular passages, executed with his usual vigor. In 1743 there appeared, in 2 volumes octavo, a prose translation, which Good calls Gurnier's, but which was the work of an unknown hand. Gurnier, with others, furnished the plates. The version is but indifferent. Some parts of it, though printed as prose, run into blank verse. In 1799 the first book was translated in rhyme by an anonymous author, and in 1808 also in rhyme by the Rev. W. Hamilton Drummond. Both versions have merit, but the greater share of praise belongs to Mr. Drummond. In 1805 Dr. Good laid before the public his 2 quarto volumes, containing a version of the whole poem in blank verse with copious notes. This translation is in general pleasing and animated, but some parts are rather stiff. Taken as a whole, it is by far the best extant, and is deemed by my publisher a desirable addition to the present volume. In 1813 was published by subscription, in 2 pompous volumes quarto, the rhymed version of Thomas Busby, music doctor. He is, to do him justice, tolerably faithful to the sense, but his couplets are far inferior to those of Mr. Drummond's first book. His notes are heavy and tedious, and all his learning second-hand. The whole book reminds the reader of the commencement of his well-known prologue, which Lord Byron, says Moore, unnecessarily travestied. When energizing objects men pursue, what are the prodigies they cannot do? In French, Lucretius has been translated several times. The earliest version is that of the Abbé de Marolles, in prose, published in 1650, which has not obtained more esteem than his other translations of classical authors. In 1685, another prose translation was published by the Baron de Couture, which is paraphrastic, but seems tolerably faithful to the sense. In 1768, Lagrange published a third, which gives the thoughts of the poet with exactness, but wants vigor and animation. And in 1794, Leblanc de Guillet brought out a fourth, in verse, which I have not minutely examined, but on which his countrymen set no very high value. The last, in 1825, was that of Pougerville, in prose, rather a paraphrase than a translation, and preserving nothing of the sententiousness of Lucretius. The Italian version of Marchetti, in blank verse, published in London 1717, and since several times reprinted, has always been highly esteemed. The Germans have three translations, one by Meyer, 1784, in prose, which Degen, cited by Moss, calls pretty accurate; another by Meinecke, 1795, in hexameter verse, which is generally considered faithful to the sense; and the last by Knebel, 1821, which is also in hexameter verse, and which is the most highly valued of the three. The Dutch have a prose translation by De Witt, printed in 1701, which Good says that he had seen, but without being induced to imitate it. I beg leave to observe that, in the notes attached to the following translation, I have not taken upon me to refute any of the doctrines of Lucretius or Epicurus. To have offered formal refutations of them would have occupied more space than could be afforded in the present volume, and many of them, in these days, require no refutation. I have, therefore, restricted myself to discharging that which Dryden admonishes me to be the duty of a translator, to do my author all the right I can, and to translate him to the best advantage. Those who seek for arguments against his tenets, physical or moral, may find them in Lactantius, in Arnobius, in the Anti-Lucretius of Cardinal Polignac, in the Bridgewater treatises, and in abundance of other English books. The famous refutation by Cardinal Polignac, called Anti-Lucretius, I might have quoted in every page, and the reader will perhaps wonder that I have not done so. But I forbore to quote him, as I forbore to quote others. He assailed Lucretius with great determination. His versification, though deficient in Lucretian ardor, is always respectable and sometimes elevated, and he would perhaps be more read had he not unluckily, as Voltaire observes, when he attacked Lucretius, attacked Newton. End of Remarks on the Life and Poem of Lucretius.